So, my name is Chester Lee. I'm one of the assistant directors here in Off-Campus Engagement and Support. Joining me today is our co-op and one of our community ambassadors. I will let them introduce themselves. Lucy, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Hi, my name is Lucy. I'm a program assistant at OCES, and today I'll be managing the chat room. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to just leave the message in chat room. Thank you.
And then, Adira, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Adhira, and I'm one of the community ambassadors working with off-campus engagement and support. It's great to have you here today.
Okay. And yeah, we are a small but mighty office. We help students for all types of issues. And as our last participants are joining, I will share my screen just to start this presentation. As Lucy mentioned, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the chat and we will get to them either within the chat or at the end of the presentation. Um, we also have all this information is on our website as well. We have a lot of in-depth information on our website, and you can always call or email us at any time. Oh, that's the wrong screen. Do, 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 do. Does everybody see the right screen? Okay. So once again, we are off-campus engagement and support. And our office focuses mainly on three areas. Um, First and foremost is the apartment search process. Um, and then that consists of us managing our database. We talk to and work with local area realtors. And we have and host programs such as the apartment fair, scam awareness programs, and so on and so forth. Our second area of expertise is renters' rights. This is where we help students with leases, talking about Boston and Network Campus um, kind of regulations within those cities, and then just tenant rights and responsibilities. And then we also have an engagement aspect, which is our third, which is our programming. We also do Breakfast Club cleanups. We're very active on social media, and we have a lot of other outreach programs as well. We are located on campus at 151 Spear Hall. You can always call us or email us as well. And as I said before, all of our information is also on our website. So, a quick overview of today's presentation. We're going to walk through the apartment search process. We've kind of narrowed it down to make it a little more succinct and summarize it a bit. We're going to talk about Boston, Boston neighborhood, rental costs, talk about our network campuses as well for those thinking about going on co-op or studying abroad, and then talking about subletting, renters' rights, and then our engagement opportunities. So it's a very daunting process. There's a lot to think about when you start cost, location, distance to campus, transportation. And we've kind of summarized this in the four P's. And what this is just breaking it down. The first and foremost, a lot of people ask about price. This is consists of all the information on front costs, rental prices. And then the second is P, the is people, roommates, realtors, etc. And then we talk about the paperwork part, leases, applications, addendums, and then how to protect yourselves, both from scams, living off campus, safety in general, and all things that are under the umbrella of protection. So to start off, we talk about price. Everybody knows that you do need to pay rent off campus, and we do want to help students budget for living off campus. Unfortunately, Boston is the fourth most expensive city to rent in the United States, the other three on the West Coast. So we want to make sure students are very prepared if they have financial aid or grants. They talk to our student financial services to see how much is covered living off campus. If there are more upfront costs, how to kind of research, maybe get some cheaper areas talking about upfront costs. So our information and database, we'll get to the neighborhoods in a bit, kind of runs through the average rental cost per area, areas that are cheaper, smaller units that are usually cheaper, but they don't include as much. In addition, Boston does have a lot of upfront costs. In general, you can expect to pay up to 4 months rent up front. This usually includes first and last month's rent, the security deposit, which can be up to 1 month's rent, and the broker/realtor fee. Now, a lot of students do want to get around this broker's fee, but it's really hard. About 80 to 90% of the properties that are for rent in Boston use a broker or realtor, and or the landlord is a broker or realtor, so they charge that fee. In addition, there are furniture and moving expenses. Furniture is one that we try to help a lot out with. A lot of students don't want to keep their furniture. They try to contact future tenants so that they have furniture from the previous tenants at a discounted price. Landlords try to work through that as well because it's expensive to kind of dispose of larger items. In addition to those, everybody knows about rent as a monthly expense, but you want to think about utilities, cable, groceries, transportation, and renter's insurance. Our website has a lot of local area vendors that do offer discounts to Northeastern students. So we highly recommend checking out our utilities page to look up average prices for different streets in terms of utilities, but also thinking about working with one of these providers for a discount. In addition, our Husky Card office offers the MBTA discount for students for the spring semester. That deadline, I think, is tomorrow, though. So if you are coming in for the spring semester, you will want to log into our Husky Card office and get the MBTA discount if you plan to use the MBTA as part of your commuting off campus. So that was a very short summary of the first P price. Most students know about how expensive it is to live off campus and their budget, so we don't really cover as much, but we do offer these one-on-one bookings and sessions to help students run through finances as they need. The second P in the 4P process is people. You are not the only person involved in the process. First and foremost is deciding if you want to live with roommates. Roommates are very common. A lot of students live with roommates. It's good to use roommates because your cost per unit goes down, but you do have to discuss kind of chores, lifestyles, whose name is going on which bill, utilities, security deposits, guests. So we highly recommend, if you are living with roommates, to have a roommate agreement. This provides at least a document, a written document that's stated of everything that may come about when living together. We have had a lot of roommate issues in the past, which is why we try to have everybody have this document, attach it to kind of the lease addendum so that there is a written document, a written contract that the roommates do sign, because almost all leases in Boston are jointly liable, which means every single tenant is treated together as one entity. So if one roommate does not pay rent, all the others do have to make up that rent. That rent has to come from somewhere, or all the tenants may face eviction. So the second group of people in the process, as I mentioned, about 80 to 90% of listings use realtors. Our database, which we will go over in a little bit, does have a list of realtors that are commonly used by Northeastern students that you can look up, do your own research. Our advice is always not to settle for a bad realtor. Even though there may be a limited supply of rental units in Boston, there are lots of realtors. You should do your research. Really just Google reviews, student reviews, anything to make sure that you aren't just going with the first person you see. In addition, the city of Boston and the state of Massachusetts requires that all realtors have a license, and that is on a database. We will cover this a little bit more in the protection section, but making sure that you check your realtor ID to not fall prey to scams. The realtors, they are responsible for generating paperwork, answering questions around kind of the lease, and also serving as that agent to negotiate certain lease terms. Rent is a little hard to negotiate, but we'll talk about a little bit of other aspects of the lease that can be negotiated a little bit later. The landlord are the people that physically may be owning the property. Just like with realtors, they do show up in a Boston database as well. So we recommend researching your landlord just like you would your realtor, and their contact information or their agent's contact information has to be listed on the lease. This is important because you want to establish good communication, and the landlord may also be serving as the person that provides the maintenance. The maintenance and landlord contact information may both be on the lease. Maybe it's just one person. Maybe there's an emergency number. But the maintenance is another group of people you want to get in touch with to report issues, especially at the beginning of the year if you already see issues going in. There's a note that most units in Boston have an as-is clause, which means if you tour the unit, you see there are a few things wrong, like there's no blinds, there's no paint. You can request those be fixed, but those are not necessarily things that are going to be fixed. Only the things that are health code violations need to be fixed. And unfortunately, painting and even blinds don't always fall into those buckets. The city of Boston knows how many students are here, so they do a good job of providing a lot of free services. In addition to the realtor database and the landlord database on their website, they also have a free inspectional services department. They have an Office of Housing Stability. And these are departments that help if there are issues that have gone unresolved. They are a they're a government entity that can make landlords fix issues or correct them, and they provide an official report. That report comes in very important in a lot of these disputes about the security deposits or issues that are going on. So we highly recommend using the City of Boston website if there are any issues, but also just making sure that you're communicating with the landlord's maintenance, as I stated previously. And then the last group of people you want to be aware of is your neighbors. Each kind of unit and neighborhood is slightly different. You want to make sure that you're moving into a place that you're going to like, not necessarily the first one you choose. We do have a lot of students off campus, but we also have a lot of residential, just residential people. So making sure that if you're in a community that has other residents, that you follow those guidelines as well. Okay, so that covers the first two P's in the 4P process. We're going to move on to the paperwork. This is the part that gets a little more confusing. This is the nitty-gritty that our office is here to help with. The first thing that's going to happen when you start looking off campus is you're going to encounter an application process. Now, the application is not the lease. It doesn't guarantee anything. The application process is usually just the credit check, the background check, just so you're aware of the process, but there is often an application fee. It does require money to run a background check, and this is where that information comes in. So once again, application does not guarantee anything. During the application process, however, a lot of realtors have come to request a 1-month deposit to basically lock in your spot. This has become known as a good faith deposit. It is not required that you pay that, but if you do decide to pay that first month's deposit, you make sure you have in writing what it's being used for. And that if you don't get the unit, that it is refunded to you. So once again, application, background check, guarantor information, credit checks, those are what's covered in the application process. After the application process is then when you are given a copy of the lease. The lease is the legally binding document that guarantees your tenancy, but there are a lot of terms in the lease. When you sign a lease, make sure you agree to every single term. We have tried to help students navigate a lot of situations where they want to break their lease, but they signed a lease that says they are responsible for either paying the rent or finding a replacement. So it's really hard to break the lease, but making sure that you agree to every single one of those terms. I think we recently had students that were fined for too many guests, smoking, all things that are outlined in the lease, and there's nothing we can do because it is a piece of legally binding document, piece of paper that you signed and agreed to the terms of. Now, within that lease, as I just mentioned, smoking and guests is an addendum. Most rental units will use a common lease issued by the state of Massachusetts, but then they'll also submit an addendum point. The addendum is important because each unit is slightly different. Some will allow subletting, some will allow pets, some will have parking. So those are what the addendum points cover. They are all slightly different between units. So just like with the lease, making sure that you read it thoroughly and make sure that you agree to all the terms. As we mentioned before, the roommate agreement is very important if you are living with other roommates because all roommates must also agree to these addendum policies, the lease contract. So just making sure you have all of those in writing as well. And then the apartment condition statement is a document that you use when moving in to document everything that's an issue with the apartment so that it doesn't get subtracted from your security deposit. This is submitted back to the landlord and you use it as proof at the end of your lease term that's like, hey, we had no damages. This was already here. This shouldn't be subtracted from our security deposit. So the apartment condition statement is also another piece of important paperwork during this process. So some common illegal and legal clauses in Boston. There are many fees that are in leases that look like they should be illegal, but they are not. Landlords and property owners are allowed to charge for cleaning fees, noise fees, and trash fees, but they have to be outlined in this lease. Sublet and roommate change fees are common. It's usually a couple $100s, and that amount is usually used to run another background check, as I mentioned before. And then, as we've talked about briefly, as is clauses, when you tour a unit, the unit is usually presented as is, minus personal belongings. So paint chips, blinds are not necessarily replaced. And jointly liable, all roommates are treated as one entity. So some illegal clauses that cannot be charged. If there are pests in the unit that are not the fault of the residents, they cannot be charged. What I mean by the fault of the residents is if the residents leave out pizza and then there's a family of rats that have a field day, that is the tenant's fault. So you are still responsible as a tenant to keep your place clean. They're also not allowed to charge snow removal fees. They have to clean up all public areas that have snow or routine maintenance fees. Anything that is considered normal wear and tear cannot be charged as a fee. Why does it keep doing that? Sorry about that. And then consider negotiating. As I mentioned, it's really hard to negotiate the rent directly, but you can often negotiate fee amounts. So like these cleaning, noise, and trash fees, if they're sublet and roommate fees, if you state at the very beginning you plan to sublet in the spring and you already know of somebody, sometimes they will waive that fee, but you want to negotiate those fees. You also want to negotiate kind of how you're being communicated for notice of entry, as landlords and property managers are allowed to enter your unit with notice to make cosmetic repairs, to show the unit to future renters, to show the unit if it's being sold. So we recommend that a lot of students just put that in the lease, being given 24 hours notice via email or text or whatever the preferred method is. Our website has a Lease Genius page where if you have any questions about your lease, you can submit an inquiry form and we'll get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. But once again, you can also talk to our office without submitting that form, but making sure that you read your lease in depth is the most important part of the paperwork process. And the last P of the 4P process is protection. Unfortunately, scammers are good. They are getting better. So we still try to do our best part to prevent scams. And this is most easily prevented by doing research. If you find a unit that is much lower than the average rental cost of that area, it's potentially a scam. Other red flags include no pictures, no paperwork. They refuse to show the unit. They offer refunds because a lot of deposit refunds are rare. And I would say that in our kind of scam reporting, we've never encountered a scam case where the student physically toured the unit. So physical tours, virtual tours are probably the best prevention of scams that we know of. And then unfortunately, if you do see scams, you can report it to us if you find it on our database. We do our best to filter everything out, but as I said, scammers are getting really good. But you will have to work with local police. I would say it's actually more important to contact your bank first if there's any chance of scam, but also these other entities to report if you do encounter a scam. And just some simple steps. Obviously, if it has stock photos, as I said before, if they're not offering a tour, you want to make sure to just be a little more skeptical about that listing specifically. Sometimes you might find listings in two different databases that have way different costs. And that is another potential sign. At least one of them is a scam. So some additional checks, as I mentioned before, that can use to prevent scams is basically checking your realtor, making sure nobody is posing as a realtor when you are doing your apartment search, checking with the state of Massachusetts and city of Boston that the property is actually a property at the correct address listed, and then that property doesn't have any violations. There are often small violations for most property, like trash removal, because during busy periods, trash does back up. But you would want to be a little more wary of like health code violations. If they're years ago, most likely they've already been addressed. But if they have a lot of them, it might be a unit that is more prone to being neglected in terms of their property. Whew. And then Boston is a city. Both Boston Police and Northeastern Police have general steps to protect yourselves, but these are the same as most cities. Avoid walking on streets with little to no light. Avoid walking alone. Avoid having earphones in at night. And NUPD does also remain very active on our social media, but they also provide a free service, which is the Red Eye Shuttle, which does transport you within 2 miles of campus. It is like a Northeastern specific Uber Lyft. There is sometimes a wait, especially in the colder months, but it is a free app and a service offered by Northeastern Police. And that covers our 4P process: price, people, paperwork, and protection. Whew, look at that. I am going to pass it to Adira to talk about our apartment search resources.
That was a great piece, Chester. Now let's everybody talk about apartment search resources. It's really important to know what resources you can use when you're looking for one. Let's start with our Northeastern database. So that's where we have, you can see the website right here on the bottom. We've got photos, video tours of properties. We've got a search list, and you can always get notified when you have listings that meet your criteria. Best part about this database is that apartment listings are all recognized and they're most likely not scams. When we're talking about database listings, we've also got filters available. We can sort them by distance to campus. We can also use we can also search by roommates and keywords such as class year or social habits. It's really important to have somebody who has similar sleeping habits to you. You cannot have a night owl living with a morning person. So when we talk about a database, we've got over 900 roommates. You can check out what universities they're from, what they enjoy doing, and this would be a good place to find people who live close to Boston or are in one of the colleges around Fenway. And this is a great resource, I would say. We also have a resource where we can have list of realtors and property managers. You can go to and this is in partnership with apartments.com. We've got most scam-free listings on here. We've got agent and broker information, so you can always get in touch with one of these people to find out which apartment works for you. Moving on, Yammer, which is now renamed to Viva Engage, is a great resource as well. It is something that I have been using personally in terms of finding people to sublet. It's a peer-to-peer message board which is moderated by our office staff and our student team. It links to a lot of off-campus housing resources. It helps in understanding the city. If you have a certain question, if you have a certain question and you think that students or your peers might be able to help you answer them, this is a great way to post your questions and ask them freely. It's a safe environment. And it also helps with finding furniture. There's been a lot of, especially in January when a lot of students come in for spring, a lot of students who are going on co-op or a lot of students who are moving away have furniture to give away for free or are selling it for really cheap. This is a great way to find those resources. Moving on. We've also got temporary housing and homestays. The best part about temporary housing and homestays is that it's a form of lodging where visitors share a residence with a local area host. This is one of the best ways to figure out the city of Boston. You understand what the locals do, what the locals enjoy. You don't fall into any tourist traps, and but they might have specific rules or limitations, especially in terms of common area, or they must have silent hours where most probably most people are sleeping or working. And you might have to perform, you have to contribute to the apartment or the house. You might have to walk their dog, you might have to help with cleaning, look up after yourself. But it's a great resource to exchange culture, to have, and also it is usually always furnished, so you don't have to worry about setting up a room all for yourself. Let's get to know Boston and NU networking cities. This is one of my favorite maps. This tells you all the neighborhoods close to the university. I happen to stay right in between Fenway and Mission Hill. We will talk about that more. These are the common neighborhoods that students usually stay in when they're studying at Northeastern. Let's talk about Back Bay, Roxbury, and Mission Hill first. So Back Bay is the most expensive, but it also comes with very beautiful apartments. Mostly working professionals and families live there. There's very few students who live there. It's pretty close to Newbury Street as well. If you ever want to buy anything that looks pretty or anything that has luxury feel to it, Newbury Street is the way to go. It is very close to Boston Public Library as well, the Copley branch. To reach Back Bay, we've got bus connection, we've got all green lines that go to Back. Roxbury is one of those areas that are on the bottom if you saw the map. They've got houses and apartments that are friendly to students and families. They've got local grocery stores pretty close to Nubian Square and Franklin Zoo. And I would say the connection to university is pretty quick. If you're staying in Roxbury, you can most probably walk, take one of the free buses, or there's always Orange Line. Mission Hill, pretty close to where I live. This is an area where you'll find a lot of students. As you walk from the university to Mission Hill, you find so many colleges and so many housing, and there's a lot of families. There's a lot of families and hospital staff living because this is pretty close to Longwood Medical Area. This includes Brigham Circle, Fitzgerald Park, and the easiest way to commute through Mission Hill would be the E line, or we've got a bus as well. I enjoy personally walking to the campus because it's only a 20-minute walk whenever it isn't raining or snowing for me. Let's talk about Fenway as well. Fenway is the area which is very close to the university. We usually go through a garden to get to Fenway. There's Boylston Street, Park Drive, places that are highly populated with students. We've got the Fenway Stadium. It's pretty close to Boston University, and you will mostly find students and professionals, working professionals, staying there. It's pretty close to Green Lines B, C, and D, and like I mentioned earlier, walkable to campus. That I think Fenway would have one of the shortest walks. When we talk about South End, it has to be one of the picturesque ones, pretty close to Back Bay, I would say. And most apartments are for working professionals and some students. They were around the theater districts and the Soha market, and it's pretty easy to commute to from South End to the campus by Orange Line. Jamaica Plain is another umbrella region where there's bigger apartments, and it's easy transit to the university by the bus line. You can always screenshot this slide because this is a lot of numbers and we shouldn't just go through the numbers. It wouldn't be fruitful for us and not a good use of our time. But this is the average rent and the neighborhood costs in Boston. This would be a good template to figure out if you, whenever you're looking for apartments, if you're getting the higher end of the deal or if you could look for more pocket-friendly options. This is if you're ever coming to Boston, it is really important to get in touch with this map. I believe after staying in Boston for a year, I can almost remember this really well. What I would like to emphasize on is that Northeastern is really connected to the transit system. When somebody's traveling on the Orange Line, they can always get off at Ruggles or Mass Ave and walk to the university. Ruggles T stop is literally on campus. So once you get out of Ruggles, you're on campus. Similar situation for Symphony, Northeastern stop, and Museum of Fine Arts if you're going to Corey College to study. This would be a good reference for you to understand how to travel through Boston. Finally, like Chester mentioned, if you get in touch with Husky Card Services, you do get a student discount to travel through Boston using the MBTA. Let's talk about our global university system and the NU campus-specific ideas. So network housing and relocation is really important. This is one of our offices that helps students move from one networking city to another. So let's say if a student is currently in Boston, is going to Seattle or is going to New York, we do have a lot of resources. And network housing and relocation is one office that you should get in touch with, especially in terms of you moving for a global co-op, for a co-op which is out of town. This happens to be a great resource. Let's also talk about network housing support. We've got domestic and global housing search, which helps with listing and roommate. We've got global connections. We've got leased housing in NYC, Portland, Maine, and Chicago. We've also got international resources and relocation advice. When we talk about support in education, they help you with searching an apartment. It's really difficult to find an apartment. It does get scary to look for an apartment when you're not in the city and you can't have an in-person visit. But we've also got community connections, which helps one Northeastern student or a Husky to connect with other students who might also be in the city for co-op, or if they might be studying there or they might be taking a semester off. It also helps in getting in touch with alumni, and it's a great way to have the Northeastern community around you, even when you're not on campus. When we talk about network housing programs, we've got student leadership opportunities as well. Network Connectors is one such program where student volunteers plan events and programs in their co-op cities. These events are geared towards connecting students and building communities outside of Mass. That means we've got a lot of students in Seattle, NYC, Arizona who are doing their co-ops in places. In these places, it's a great way to meet other students. And we've got Beyond Boston Instagrammers where they talk about their out of Boston and out of Massachusetts experience in terms of co-op and living outside. You can always follow them on Instagram. Let's talk about campus resources by location. You can take a screenshot of this and then copy and go to any of the links if you are going to campuses that are other than the Boston campus. Let's also talk about subletting. Subletting is a key player when you're looking at your lease. Let's start with the question why. Why would a person sublet? It's pretty easy. If you get a co-op that's outside of Boston, or if you get a co-op outside of your city you're living in, you wouldn't want to be on lease here and at the new city and pay rent for both places. It's easier if you just If you sublet your apartment and somebody else is responsible for the apartment for the period that you're gone, they would be responsible for the rent and in case anything goes wrong in that apartment during that time. Just a second. Like I mentioned, I live in Longwood Medical Area, so a lot of sirens around me right now. If you want to sublet a room, it's really important to make sure that your lease allows subletting. You need to get your landlord's permission in writing. You could list your room on the NU database, discuss with your roommates if they are comfortable, and screen potential subleases. It's important that your roommates are also comfortable with the person who's coming in. Like Chester mentioned earlier, subletting does come with a fee sometimes, so you would have to pay that in order to ensure background checks. Always have a sublet agreement about what the new person's roles and responsibilities are going to be, how much they are going to pay, what bills are going to be in their name, and so on. We also have a tip that all communications must be in the written format so that you can always go back to them or show proof of communication and if there is ever a dispute. And make sure that the sublet pays the landlord directly and it doesn't go through you. Like we mentioned, sublet is to give away your responsibilities for the time that you wouldn't be staying in the apartment. So it's important that they have a direct communication and connect as well.
Okay, thank you, Adira. I'm going to take over again to kind of finish us up. We're going to talk a little bit about renters' rights and responsibilities. So pretty general, tenants are very protected, especially in Boston, knowing how many students there are. You can always know that realtors, licensed realtors, will follow all legal practices. There are health codes, safety codes for your apartment as well. All maintenance issues have to be addressed. Housing codes have to be met. As I mentioned, Boston has its own department, free department that all tenants can call the inspectional services to make sure that these are all up to code and up to date. In addition, we talked about the apartment condition statement and how it protects your security deposits, how important it is to take videos and pictures when you first move in. And then also notice, like when you are touring the apartment, making sure to turn on the water, flush toilets, make sure everything is in working order. And the most important is tenants are always allowed to exercise legal action without the fear of retaliation. Now, a little bit on the responsibility side. First and foremost, you have to pay rent. You have to pay by the date outlined in the lease. That's usually the 31st, the 1st, maybe the 2nd. It all depends on the lease, but it's very usually common around the 1st of the month. As I mentioned before, you have to keep your apartment clean and orderly. We did have a case where students got their security deposits deducted, but when the pictures and videos came to us, it was pretty clear that they were not cleaning their own apartment. The pests were a result of trash overflowing and not being thrown out. In addition, for those maintenance issues, you have to report them. If there is a small leak in your apartment and you don't report it, it could be a bigger leak behind the wall. So it is your responsibility, just because there are not maintenance workers that constantly come in to look at your apartment, to report all maintenance issues. As I mentioned a few times before already, roommates are jointly liable. You are responsible as one entity to pay the entirety of the rent. And then following all the lease clauses, it is a legal document, making sure you agree to all those lease clauses before you sign that initial lease. And then, as I mentioned about notice of entry, you do have to allow your landlord or representatives to enter the unit with reasonable notice for showings, repairs, and other things that they might need to look at. Some Boston-specific rules: no more than four. No more than four unrelated persons can live in the same unit. This is more an ordinance, a fire safety hazard. It's actually just more important that the lease allows everybody on it. There are newer units that allow 6 and even 8 if there's enough square footage, but making sure that everybody is on the lease is the most important part about being a tenant. Otherwise, you face eviction. Actually, everybody in that unit faces eviction if there's guests that stay there longer than they should be. And also, as we mentioned on the boston.gov page, that there are definitely things like street parking restrictions, trash removal days, how to recycle large items. Boston.gov provides all this information, and it's very important to look at it depending on where you are living. And our office obviously provides a lot of engagement opportunities. Adira mentioned a little bit about our network housing, but the best way to get involved with kind of the Boston area is definitely to follow our newsletter, talk to our community ambassadors, and follow us on social media. As I mentioned, we do breakfast club cleanups. We have tabling events on campus during class periods for like hot chocolate. So there are a lot of ways to kind of just be involved, get to meet other students in the neighborhood, and just take advantage of being a Northeastern student living off campus. And this concludes kind of our main presentation. We do have an apartment search toolkit on our website that we also have the QR code here. If you have questions after this presentation, we are going to take some questions now that haven't been answered, but you can always call us, send us an email, or visit our website. I will leave this page open for now and see if I can get to some of these more recent questions that Lucy has not answered yet.
Yeah, Chester, could you please explain about the rent fee that's on the map first?
Rent fee on the map?
Yeah, sorry, average rent fee. Lots of students are and parents are asking about the average rent fee. Like,
Oh, okay, yeah. So that average rental data is data that is pulled from apartments.com. That one's a little old. I think it's from 2023. We haven't pulled 2024 yet, but that is basically the price range of all those respective neighborhoods. That chart is on our website as well. And I would say the ranges basically differ depending on how new a building is, makes an impact. How close it is to a main street or a T-stop makes an impact as well. And sometimes there are units that are really cheap that are literally bare bones, don't include anything. So there are rental units like that. But for general purposes, that's the average rental cost that has been compiled as data from apartments.com. I think I saw a question about no more than four. No. Okay, I'm going to open this chat. Let's see where we are in the chat.
can you also explain about the NHR? Lots of students and parents are asking about Vancouver and like Toronto housing.
Yeah, so NHR is our Network Housing and Relocation Office. They help with everything outside of Boston. But if you already know your specific network site, like Vancouver, they have their own page as well. I don't think other offices are as big as ours when it comes to handling off campus, but each network location does have people that help with them. And if you can't find those people, NHR is the best place to start. They are the one that is the connection between all the non-Boston locations. So once again, that email is nhr@northeastern.edu. If you are looking for other places, as I mentioned, each network site does also have their own webpage that you will also want to consult when trying to figure out where to live in those cities. I think Vancouver, I know, for example, New York, we have a building that houses 20 students that's owned by Northeastern. I am not sure of the other cities, which is why you want to contact them directly or our NHR office. What else you got for me, Lucy?
I think it will be great that we're also like talking about when student and parents should start to tour the apartment, like kind of quick timeline.
Sure. Yeah, I would say for the fall 2025 semester, so if you are trying to start a lease on September 2025, the majority of our students every year for the following fall sign a lease between February and April. That is the majority. There are definitely going to be people that sign earlier or later in that process, but for example, our annual apartment fair is usually at the beginning of February, where local area realtors and landlords come in, show what properties they have available. But that is the time frame that we're most familiar with. The majority of students definitely sign a lease between February and April. It's never too early to start searching. The reason for this is you have more options as things come on and off the market. If you get into the process earlier, if you know you're already going to be living off campus, it's never too early to start.
I think you can also talk about like Lightview, little
Sure.
thing.
Yeah. Lightview is not a Northeastern owned property, but it is partnered with Northeastern. I think it is a 90, high 90 percentage of Northeastern students. They have their own application process and wait lists. So we basically just treat it as a building that only accepts Northeastern students. And the best way to learn about Lightview is definitely just to go onto their website and complete their application process. I do believe they are fully booked for the spring. I am not sure about next year.
We have one questions about, is it typical for the tenants to pay broker fees? What options are there to avoid that?
As I mentioned at the beginning, it's very hard to avoid broker's fee. About 80 to 90% of the listings in Boston have broker's fees because the city is one of the few cities in the US that still allows broker's fees. Um, in order to avoid broker's fees, you would need to find somebody, I guess, that's already living in a unit, maybe if you're taking over their lease, but it's really hard because a lot of landlords are also brokers, and because they're allowed to charge a broker's fee, they generally will. So in order to avoid broker's fees, I mean, that you would have to find a listing that specifically says no broker's fees. And what happens with some of these listings that are basically larger property management companies or other listings is they tend to already be more expensive. So paying a broker's fees, if you're trying to avoid on costs, the large property management companies might not be worth it because they are also more expensive. But you just have to do more research and you have to look more if you are trying to avoid these broker's fees.
I have also seen situations where students and parents have tried to negotiate the broker's fee. So you could always try that as well, in case you get a discount or something on those lines. Well, one thing I've learned in Boston is you need to ask for something if you want it. So it's best if you do try to ask if you could get a discount on the broker's fee. That would be a good way to go.
It never hurts to ask. Anything else, Lucy?
I have a lot of questions. So I think most of the questions about the rent fee or charging fee. But we already talked about it. So I think we can answer these questions. Is a September 1st lease start before classes start in Boston?
There are some leases that start before September 1st. There are some August 1st. But most leases in Boston are August 1st to September 1st to August 31st.
We have some of international students here. Do you want to give like quick tips to international students how they can find the apartment, like kind of quick detail?
Yes. So for international students, your first step is definitely to contact OGS. Our OGS office works closely with us because in order to kind of log into our database, you need to get everything approved first so you can log in with Northeastern credentials, and then you need your visa approved so that you can put your name on leases. So the only additional steps for Northeastern students is definitely working with OGS to get those visas approved. But everything else is the same. When you apply for off-campus rental units, sometimes they'll ask for a cosigner. And a lot of international students don't have that to provide. But you want to just communicate with your landlord, realtor, or property manager that you are international students, but you have the funds to pay the rent. And sometimes they'll waive having a cosigner.
Yeah, I think we have some questions about the slides and recording. Slides, yeah, can you explain about that, Chester?
Sure. Yeah. All of this information is on our website. We already have a previous presentation on there. I will probably be uploading this one on to the website later today as well. But all of these slides, they're taken directly from our website. So we highly encourage that everybody go to our website. A short link is northeastern.edu/off-campus. Okay, we will stay on if there are a few more questions for another 10 minutes. So if you have questions, as Lucy gets to them in the chat, we'll also be here to help answer. And if you have questions after this, once again, feel free to call, email, or visit our website.